Desmond Doss didn't carry a weapon. He was a Seventh-day Adventist from Lynchburg, Virginia, and his faith wouldn't allow it. His unit tried to have him discharged. When that failed, they made his life miserable, took his rifle, woke him up at night, tried everything short of a direct order to get him to quit. Doss refused to quit. He would serve as a combat medic. He would save lives. He would not carry a gun. On May 5, 1945, on a ridge the Marines called Hacksaw Ridge on the island of Okinawa, his unit was driven back with massive casualties. Doss stayed on the ridge alone, under fire, for hours. He improvised a rope system from the cliff face and lowered wounded men down to safety one at a time. When dawn came, he had saved 75 men. He later said he didn't think about saving all of them. He just thought about the next one. Only the next one. That's Okinawa. Not the strategy, not the numbers, not the debate about the bomb that came after. The ground level of what it actually cost. In individual men, in individual moments, in the kind of decisions that happen in the dark when nobody's watching, to take one island 340 miles from the Japanese mainland. Because what happened on Okinawa between April 1st and June 21st, 1945, is the reason Harry Truman made the most debated decision of the 20th century. 50,000 American casualties, 110,000 Japanese soldiers dead, between 80,000 and 140,000 Okinawan civilians, roughly a third of the island's population, killed in the fighting or in the mass suicides that Japanese propaganda had promoted as preferable to capture. When Truman's military planners applied those casualty rates to the projected invasion of the Japanese mainland, the number they put on his desk was between 250,000 and 1 million American dead. He chose the bomb. This is the story of why Okinawa made that choice feel like the only one available. To understand what made Okinawa different from every previous Pacific battle, you need to understand what the Japanese had learned from losing every previous Pacific battle, and how they applied those lessons in a way that American planners hadn't fully anticipated. Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima. In every major island battle before Okinawa, Japanese forces had tried to defend the beaches and been destroyed by American naval gunfire before the real fighting started. The lesson was clear. Don't fight the Americans at the waterline. They have too much firepower. Fight them inland, underground, where the firepower can't reach. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commanding Japanese forces on Okinawa, took that lesson further than anyone before him. He didn't just pull back from the beaches. He abandoned them completely. He let the Americans land unopposed. Then he waited. Ushijima had spent months building a defensive system in the limestone hills of southern Okinawa that represented the final evolution of Japanese defensive doctrine in the Pacific. Miles of tunnels connecting artillery positions, machine gun nests, and ammunition depots at depths that made naval bombardment useless. Every ridge dominated the terrain immediately below it. Every position had interlocking fields of fire with the positions on either side. When the bombardment stopped, his men would emerge from underground, reoccupy their firing positions, and be waiting for the infantry that followed. He knew he couldn't win. That wasn't the point. His objective was the same as Kuribayashi's on Iwo Jima: inflict maximum casualties to make the invasion of the Japanese mainland politically and militarily unsustainable. Not win the battle. Change the calculation in Washington. What Ushijima understood, what makes Okinawa one of the most strategically sophisticated defensive operations in military history, is that a Japanese defeat at maximum American cost was more valuable to Japan than a Japanese victory at low cost. He was right. He lost Okinawa, and he changed the end of the war. Before the first Marines set foot on the island, Japan launched Operation Kikusui, the kamikaze campaign that accompanied the Okinawa battle. 1,900 aircraft in 10 coordinated waves. They sank 34 ships and damaged 368 others. Nearly 5,000 American sailors died at sea while their counterparts fought on land. Admiral Spruance later described the weeks off Okinawa as the most psychologically exhausting of his career. Not because of tactical decisions, but because of watching ships go down every day with no ability to pull the fleet out of range. The American landing on April 1st, 1945, L-Day, Operation Iceberg, was the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific theater. 183,000 soldiers of General Buckner's 10th Army, 3 Marine divisions and 4 Army divisions, supported by the largest concentration of naval firepower the Pacific had seen. The 1st Marines across the beaches of northern and central Okinawa found almost nothing. They advanced miles inland without firing a shot. Some described it as the most peaceful landing of the entire Pacific War. Veterans who had hit the beaches at Tarawa and Iwo Jima couldn't believe what they were walking into. It was exactly what Ushijima wanted them to believe. When American forces turned south and entered the limestone terrain where Ushijima had built his defensive system, the nature of the battle changed completely. The hills absorbed naval gunfire without significant damage. Defenders emerged from underground positions when the bombardment stopped and reoccupied the same firing points. American advance was measured in meters per day. The Shuri Line, the central defensive network Ushijima had built around Shuri Castle in south-central Okinawa, absorbed weeks of American attacks. Divisions arrived at the front line at full strength and left weeks later at a third of their original composition or less. The 10th Army was losing between 3,000 and 4,000 men per week. It was the worst casualty rate of the entire Pacific War, and the only way forward was the same as on Iwo Jima, position by position, cave by cave, with flamethrowers and demolition charges, with no ability to outflank or cut off the enemy, because the enemy existed in a subterranean dimension the attackers couldn't reach. Staff Sergeant Desmond Doss, combat medic of the 10th Army on Okinawa, received the Medal of Honor for what he did on Hacksaw Ridge, the Maeda Escarpment, during the battle. His unit was driven back with massive casualties. Doss stayed on the ridge alone, under enemy fire for hours. In a later interview, he described what he remembered of that night. "I didn't think about saving them all. I just thought about the next one. Just the next one. When dawn came and I looked down, I couldn't believe what had happened. But in the moment, I wasn't doing it. Something bigger than me was doing it through me." Doss's description, "just the next one," captures something that operational analysis can't register. The scale of what Okinawa demanded from individual men, in individual positions, in the dark, without information about what was happening 20 meters to their left or right. The battle is often discussed in strategic terms, what it meant for Truman's decision, what it proved about Japanese defensive doctrine. The ground level is men like Doss on a cliff in the dark, thinking only about the next one. If this is giving you a different way to think about what the Pacific War actually cost, subscribe and hit the bell. New video every week at this level of detail. Back to the story. On May 4, 1945, Ushijima made a decision that contradicted everything his defensive doctrine had been built on. He ordered a massive counterattack, not a local action to recover a position, a large-scale offensive with the bulk of his available forces, designed to break the American lines. It was destroyed. Japanese units that emerged from their underground positions were massacred by American artillery and aviation before they could reach American lines with any effectiveness. The losses were catastrophic and irreplaceable. But the counterattack had an unintended consequence. It accelerated the collapse of the Shuri Line. American forces, exploiting the Japanese losses, broke through the central defensive position at the end of May. Ushijima pulled his surviving forces south toward the tip of the island, compressing the defense into a shrinking perimeter. The end was no longer a question of if, but of how much it would cost. By mid-June, the battle was operationally decided. On June 18, 1945, General Buckner was killed by Japanese artillery at a forward observation post, a fragment of coral the size of a coin that struck him in the chest. He was the highest-ranking American officer killed in combat in the entire war. He died 3 days before the battle he had commanded was officially over. On June 21, 1945, Ushijima and his chief of staff performed the ritual suicide that Japanese military tradition required of commanders who had failed to hold their position. The organized resistance on Okinawa ceased. Of the 110,000 Japanese soldiers on the island, approximately 7,000 were captured. The rest died fighting or in their positions. The numbers from Okinawa arrived at Harry Truman's desk in Washington, with an analysis attached that no president would have wanted to read. Operation Downfall. The planned invasion of the Japanese mainland, projected for November 1945 starting with Kyushu, had been wargamed by American military planners before Okinawa. After Okinawa, those projections were revised upward significantly. Applying Okinawa casualty rates to the scale of a mainland invasion produced numbers that ranged, depending on the assumptions used, from 250,000 to 1 million American dead. Japanese casualties, including civilians who Japanese government propaganda was preparing to fight with bamboo spears rather than surrender, ran into the millions. Truman had another option on his desk. The atomic bomb had been successfully tested in New Mexico on July 16, 1945. His scientific and military advisors presented comparative numbers. The decision wasn't simple. No decision involving the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians can be simple. But the logic that Okinawa had established was relentless. Japanese resistance wouldn't yield to conventional invasion without a cost that no democratic government could justify to its population. That wasn't a theoretical assessment. It had been demonstrated on an 80-kilometer island at a cost of nearly 50,000 American casualties over 82 days. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay took off from Tinian. The strategic paradox of Okinawa is one of the cleanest in military history. Japan lost the battle decisively. Every military objective fell to American forces. The island was taken. And yet the battle achieved Japan's actual strategic objective, not winning Okinawa, but making the invasion of the Japanese mainland politically and militarily unsustainable. Ushijima calculated correctly. He lost the island, and he changed the end of the war. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who had overseen the entire Pacific campaign from Midway to Okinawa, wrote after the war about what the battle meant to him. On Okinawa, uncommon valor was a common virtue. I know of no words more fitting to describe what I witnessed. Men who in any other circumstance would have been ordinary men, doing things no ordinary man should have to do. That is what Okinawa demanded, and that is what it received. Nimitz's phrase, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue," is engraved on the Okinawa Memorial in Washington. It is possibly the most precise description of a battle that any commander has produced about any engagement of World War II. Not heroism as the exception, heroism as the standard, the baseline of what the situation required. Americans have a complicated relationship with Okinawa, and specifically with what it means for the debate over the atomic bomb. The argument about Hiroshima and Nagasaki has never been settled. It's one of the most actively contested historical and moral debates in American public life, and it's unlikely to be resolved definitively. The people who defend Truman's decision point to the Okinawa numbers and the projected invasion casualty figures. The people who question it point to evidence that Japan was already preparing to surrender, and that the Soviet declaration of war might have been sufficient. Both sides of that argument are serious. Both have historical evidence to support them. What Okinawa does is make the case for Truman's decision comprehensible in human terms, rather than just strategic ones. Before Okinawa, the projected invasion casualties were a mathematical estimate, a number on a page. After Okinawa, they were an extrapolation from something that had actually happened, that American commanders had actually experienced, that the families of 50,000 casualties had actually lived through. The decision Truman faced wasn't abstract. It was, do we do again, at 10 times the scale, what we just did on Okinawa? Or do we use the new weapon? That's the question Okinawa forced, and it's the question that makes the battle significant beyond its military outcomes. The American veterans of Okinawa came home to a country that was moving quickly toward Cold War politics, Korea, and the nuclear age. Many of them rarely spoke about what they had experienced. The pattern was common across the Pacific veteran community, not the celebrated silence of the greatest generation mythology, but something more complicated. The difficulty of translating the ground level of what Okinawa demanded into language that made sense in peacetime. Desmond Doss received his Medal of Honor from President Truman in October 1945. He went back to Lynchburg, Virginia. He never fully recovered from the tuberculosis he contracted on Okinawa. He farmed. He rarely spoke about the ridge. The final accounting of Okinawa doesn't resolve neatly. General Buckner died 3 days before the battle he commanded ended. General Ushijima chose to die on the day it ended, following a tradition that he believed required it. Two commanders, American and Japanese, who had both calculated correctly what Okinawa would cost. Neither lived to see the full consequences of that cost. Those consequences arrived on August 6th over Hiroshima, 3 days later over Nagasaki, and on August 15th, when Emperor Hirohito spoke on the radio for the first time in Japanese history to announce the surrender. The question of whether Okinawa made the atomic bomb necessary, or whether it made it inevitable in Truman's mind, even if other options might have existed, is one that historians and ethicists are still working through. It will probably never be answered to everyone's satisfaction. What can be said clearly is this: Okinawa was the most expensive island battle in the Pacific, in American casualties, in Japanese military deaths, and in Okinawan civilian lives. It achieved every military objective the Americans set for it, and it changed the calculation of how the war would end, in a way that no amount of American military superiority could change back. The lesson of Okinawa isn't about tactics or strategy, though both are worth studying. It's about what happens when a defending force correctly identifies that its defeat can be made so costly that the cost itself becomes a strategic weapon. Ushijima didn't fight to win Okinawa. He fought to make Okinawa the argument that changed Washington's mind. He succeeded. The men who took Okinawa, island by island and cave by cave, didn't know they were providing the evidence for Truman's decision. They were thinking about the next position, the next cave, the next wounded man who needed to get off a cliff, just the next one. That's what Okinawa was. 82 days of ordinary Americans doing things no ordinary person should have to do, at a cost that changed the end of the most destructive war in human history. Uncommon valor was a common virtue.